Hi, I'm Jenny.
I arrived at the baby shower wearing the dress I knew my sister would hate, not because it was inappropriate, but because it reminded her that I still existed. Pale blue silk, simple, elegant, bought with the kind of money I wasn't supposed to have. Not anymore. The backyard was decked out in soft pastels and gold letters that spelled out, Mommy to be. Everyone wore their best suburban smiles, and not one of them turned when I walked in. It was like I was a shadow. My sister, Layla, stood near the dessert table, laughing too hard at something someone said. She hadn't looked at me yet,
But I knew she saw me.
her hand twitched when I entered. Her eyes blinked faster for a second. That was her tell. She always did that when she was nervous or annoyed. The kind of blink that said, "Don't ruin this for me." I didn't plan to. The truth is, I hadn't been to anything involving Layla in over 2 years. Not her birthday brunches, not family dinners, not even our mother's hospital stay. I had become the name people whispered like it might cause a scene. Not because I had done something unforgivable, but because I had done something worse in their eyes. I'd walked away. From the family, from the legacy, from the carefully curated version of life that made everyone else feel superior. They told themselves I was selfish,
Cold.
dramatic. But the truth was quieter than that. I had just gotten tired of being the placeholder in someone else's fantasy. Especially Layla's. She was always the golden one. The one with the shiny hair, the magazine smile fiancé, the Pinterest perfect home. Her husband, Devin, ran a tech startup that made more headlines than profits, but that didn't stop him from bragging about the funding rounds at every holiday gathering. I used to smile politely. I used to clap when everyone else clapped. Until I didn't. Until I stopped pretending. And that's when things started to break. But that day, the day of the shower, I had come for one reason only, to be seen. Not in the way Layla was used to being seen, with applause and filtered photos. I had come to be acknowledged. Not for approval, just for the truth. I stood near the edge of the patio for several minutes before anyone spoke to me. It was Aunt Maureen who finally walked over, her wine glass already half empty. She smiled with tight lips, like someone trying to remember which side of a family fight you're supposed to be on. She asked me how work was going. I told her it was going just fine. She nodded, looked over her shoulder, then wandered off without waiting for more. That was the pattern all afternoon. People came and went. I watched them gather around Layla, watched her accept gifts with that overly practiced giggle she used to charm people. I noticed she never unwrapped my present. It sat on the far edge of the table untouched. The tag was still visible. My handwriting unmistakable. Her husband saw it. Devin's eyes rested on it for a second longer than they should have. He recognized the name, but said nothing. He hadn't said my name in years. Probably hadn't even spoken about me since that day in court when our family's business was being torn apart. He didn't know then that I had already begun building something else. Something quieter. Something that couldn't be erased with lies and birthday balloons. As the sun dipped lower, I stayed. I wasn't waiting for reconciliation. I wasn't hoping for some emotional scene. I was watching, observing, gathering. It had always been like that with me. People thought silence meant weakness. What they didn't understand was that silence can also be preparation. And I had been preparing for a very long time. When the party wound down, I was about to leave when I saw Devin slip inside. He had that hurried, distracted look he always got when he was trying to hide something. I waited a moment, then followed, quiet as a whisper. Through the window, I watched him answer a call, pacing in the hallway just past the kitchen. He was angry, not yelling but close. I caught fragments of words. Deadline, funds frozen, what do you mean bought out? His hand gripped the edge of the counter. His knuckles pale. He didn't see me watching. That was fine. I didn't need him to see me. Not yet. The next morning, the news broke. Devin's company, Valoric Systems, had been quietly acquired in a weekend buyout deal. No details released, just the name of the holding group. People wouldn't recognize it. It was too new, too discreet. But if Devin had bothered to trace it back far enough, he would have found my name. Or rather, the alias I'd been using since I left the family business. The one I had legally secured after I stepped away and started investing.
No one knew it was me.
Not even my accountant. Only my lawyer knew the full story. I'd made sure of that. By noon, I had 4 missed calls from my father, 2 from Layla, and 1 text from an unknown number. What did you do? I didn't reply. I let the silence grow heavy. I wanted them to sweat. Because I knew the truth about Devon's company. I knew the books had been cooked. The investment reports exaggerated. The real value was in the IP, which had been slowly bleeding into side contracts no one else knew about, except me. I'd seen the breadcrumbs years ago. I'd followed them carefully. I'd watched as he siphoned off potential into backroom deals that benefited only him. And Layla. And my father. Because for them, the business world was a stage, and I had been the understudy asked to applaud from the wings. I didn't plan revenge, not exactly. I planned clarity. A quiet unraveling. 1 stitch at a time. Later that week, Layla called again. I didn't pick up. I didn't have to. She left a message, breathless, her voice shaking with a kind of confusion only people with power feel when it's suddenly gone. She said she didn't understand what was happening. She said the investors were panicking. She said she needed to talk. But what she meant was, she needed to control the narrative before it spun too far. I sat in my office, high above the city, glass walls shimmering with evening light. The air smelled like ink and new furniture. My name was etched in metal on the door, small but permanent. I played the message once more, then deleted it. I didn't owe her comfort. I didn't owe her explanation. All I owed was the truth. The funny thing was, she had done this to herself. It had started long before Devon's company, long before the baby shower, long before I walked away. It started when we were kids, and she learned that crying louder got her more attention, that blaming others made her blameless. That power wasn't about being right. It was about being seen as right. She had learned it young, and she used it like a weapon. I had just never expected that one day I'd be the one to take it away from her without saying a word. When the legal documents landed on their doorstep a few days later, my name wasn't on them. The entity that had acquired Valerix was already restructuring. Devon's title was changed to former founder. His golden parachute deal, void. The board had voted. They'd seen the numbers. They'd seen the red flags I'd left just visible enough. They knew who had saved them from a scandal. And though they didn't know it was me, that didn't matter. I didn't need the credit. Just the result. I went for a walk that evening, through the same park Layla and I used to play in when we were girls. I paused near the old carousel, watching it spin. It was beautiful from afar. But up close, you could see the chipped paint, the frayed reins, the tired horses. Just like us, I thought. Spinning in circles, pretending we were going somewhere. But I wasn't spinning anymore. I was steering. Back at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down to write a letter. Not to Layla, not to Devon, but to myself. A reminder that walking away isn't weakness, that silence isn't surrender, that being ignored can sometimes be the best camouflage. Because when they don't see you coming, they never know what hit them. And Layla, well, she had always been good at pretending. But now she was out of lines. And I was just getting started. 3 days after the company buyout made headlines, I found myself sitting across from a man I hadn't seen in 5 years. He looked older, tired in a way that no amount of money or makeup could hide. His tie was askew, and his hand trembled slightly as he poured cream into his coffee. I let him speak first. He always needed to be the one to start. He asked how I'd done it. Not angrily, not even bitterly, just curiously. Like someone asking how a magician pulled a trick he couldn't explain. I smiled politely and told him I was just prepared. He laughed once, the kind of dry, stunned laugh people make when they realize they underestimated the wrong person. Then he leaned back and admitted it. They'd never thought I'd come back for anything. Not the company. Not revenge. Not even closure. They had all assumed I was gone for good, off playing charity work or nursing old grudges in silence. But I hadn't gone far. I had just gone quiet.
He warned me then.
Not directly. Just a gentle suggestion that maybe I should stop now before I ruin things permanently. I thanked him for the coffee and walked away without saying another word. He didn't stop me. I don't think he could. The truth was already moving like a current, pulling everything under with it. That same evening, an email landed in my inbox. No subject line, no signature, just a scanned document. It was a copy of an internal family trust update. A legal transfer of assets from my mother's side of the family to Layla's unborn child. Not surprising, except for one thing. The funds being allocated weren't theirs to give. They had been part of a dormant account created years ago under my name. Left untouched, accumulating value, almost forgotten, until someone had tried to quietly siphon it for a future that didn't include me. That was their final mistake, because I still had access. I printed the document, added it to a thick binder that now lived beside my bed, and made a call to my lawyer. By morning, the account was frozen pending investigation. By noon, my sister's name had been flagged for unauthorized access. I didn't announce it. I didn't send warning texts or dramatic emails. I simply acted. Because if there was one thing Layla hated more than being challenged, it was being outplayed. The real twist came later that week, when Devin showed up at my office without an appointment. My assistant buzzed me nervously, whispering that he looked desperate. I let him in. He didn't sit, just paced. He accused me of everything: sabotage, manipulation, theft. I listened calmly, sipping tea. Then he said something that stopped me cold. He said Layla hadn't known, that she wasn't part of it, that she thought the family money was hers by right, that she had no idea I was still legally connected to any of it. It would have been easier if he had lied. But the way he said it, soft, hesitant, broken, it made me pause. Because deep down, I had always wondered, had Layla truly known what she was doing all along? Or had she just floated along on the lies of men who convinced her she was untouchable? I didn't answer him. I just opened the folder on my desk and handed him a copy of the original fund creation contract. My name on every page, my signature clear, dates unchanged. Then I pointed to the exit.
He didn't argue.
He left without saying anything else. That night, I went through old messages, emails, voicemails, texts. Not because I needed more evidence, but because I needed to remember. The birthdays I wasn't invited to, the family photos I wasn't in, the Thanksgiving dinner where no one noticed I had left halfway through, the voice memo from Layla 2 years ago telling me maybe it was better if I stayed distant for now. She hadn't said it with malice, just convenience, like I was clutter. But I wasn't clutter. I had been the foundation, and they'd just built a prettier house on top of me. The following weekend, I received an invitation. Not to a family event. To a shareholders' meeting. Devin's company, now under new management, mine, was holding an emergency session to review the executive restructuring plan. I wasn't supposed to be there. But the holding company that owned the majority now had a new director.
Me.
I walked into the boardroom in silence. Several people turned. A few gasped. Devin wasn't there. He had resigned. But Layla was. She sat near the back, next to a man I didn't recognize. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Her mouth parted like she wanted to speak, but no words came. I took my seat and waited. The meeting was short. The new roadmap was approved. Department budgets were reviewed. A new CFO was appointed. Then, right at the end, I asked to speak. The room quieted. I stood up and thanked everyone for their patience. I said I believed in clean beginnings. I said I believed in accountability. I never once mentioned Layla's name, but my gaze lingered on her just long enough. She got the message. After the meeting, she caught up to me in the hallway. Her voice was brittle, her face flushed. She asked if we could talk. I said yes. I didn't smile. I didn't soften. I just listened. She apologized. For not calling.
For not understanding.
For believing what she had been told. She said she had thought I'd moved on. That I didn't care. That I was always the quiet one, the one who didn't fight. That when I left, it felt like a relief. but also like something had broken and she didn't know how to fix it. I told her I wasn't broken, that I had rebuilt. She asked me if I had done all of this to get back at her. I paused, then said no. I did it to get back what was mine, and to make sure no one could erase me again. She nodded. Tears welled up, but she didn't cry. Layla never cried in public. Then, quietly, she said the one thing I didn't expect. She told me she was leaving Devon, that the baby was coming soon, and she didn't want to raise it in a house built on secrets and fake wins. That she was tired of being the trophy, the perfect one, the shield for other people's mess. I believed her. Not completely, but enough. We didn't hug. We didn't plan lunch. We just stood there in a strange, heavy silence that didn't feel angry anymore. Just real. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop.
No headings. No spreadsheets.
Just a single sentence. They never thought I would come back, and now they don't know how to make me leave. It wasn't about revenge anymore.
It wasn't even about them.
It was about me, finally stepping into the space I had always been told I wasn't allowed to take. And maybe that was the biggest twist of all. Not that I had won, but that I had never needed their permission to do so. The weeks after that boardroom meeting moved fast. It was like something had cracked wide open in the universe, and all the secrets that had once been buried were clawing their way to the surface. The new company leadership was digging deep into everything Devon had left behind: contracts, payouts, emails, and things weren't adding up. Several vendors reported services paid for twice. One consultant sent a screenshot of a wire transfer marked "Family Clearance Bonus." Another flagged a non-disclosure agreement she said was rushed and signed by someone pretending to be me. The holding group's legal team kept looping me in quietly. I didn't tell Layla. I wanted to believe she wasn't involved, but a part of me had learned not to trust even the softest versions of her anymore. The truth has a way of looking like love when it needs something from you. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the call from the CFO. She said she had something she wanted to show me in person. I walked into her office expecting spreadsheets. What she handed me instead was a folder filled with printed emails. Devon's inbox had finally been unlocked by the IT team, and in it, threads dated as far back as 2 years ago. One sender kept showing up. Julia M. That was my mother. I had frozen her out after the inheritance stunt, but I hadn't known she was involved in the company. Not directly, anyway. The emails were slick, passive, wrapped in plausible deniability. Suggestions. Opinions. Things like, maybe a different majority shareholder would make things smoother, and has she signed anything confirming she's no longer involved? I flipped page after page until I found one dated around the time I had first stepped back from the family business. My mother had emailed Devon a proposal outlining how he could gently guide me out of company affairs without raising legal alarms. It wasn't phrased that bluntly, but the intent was clear. And worse, at the bottom of the thread was a message forwarded to Layla. The words were burned into the page. Let's just smooth this out for your future. You deserve the space to grow your family, not fight over old shadows.
That was how she saw me.
A shadow. Something to be moved around, faded, forgotten. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked out of the office and stood in the parking garage for 10 minutes without moving. Then I pulled out my phone and called my attorney. That night, I requested an emergency injunction to halt all trust-related distributions tied to my name, and to formally open a discovery claim for fraudulent signatures, conflict of interest, and financial misrepresentation. Within 48 hours, the documents were served. One to Devon's lawyer, one to my mother's office, one to Layla's address. I didn't hear from any of them directly for days. Then, early on a fog-soaked morning, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my mother standing on the steps. Her hair was perfectly curled. Her coat, the same one she wore to charity events and local fundraisers, looked pristine. But her eyes, they looked tired. Not puffy from crying, but hollow, like something in her had been emptied out. She asked to come in. I didn't say yes, but I stepped back. She walked slowly through the living room, looking at the walls like they were strangers. She said she'd heard about the documents. She said it wasn't personal. It was about preserving stability, about managing appearances, about making sure things didn't collapse. I let her talk for 7 minutes straight before saying a word. Then I asked her what she had meant when she called me an old shadow. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I asked her if she remembered telling me, as a child, that being quiet made me lovable, that letting others shine was how I'd earn affection, that speaking up meant causing trouble. She said those were different times. I told her they weren't. Then I walked to my kitchen table, picked up a binder, and placed it gently in front of her. It had everything. Every screenshot, every payment trail, every whispered lie dressed up as a family decision. She looked at it for a long time. Then she reached out, closed the binder, and said she didn't come to argue. She came to ask me to drop it. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how deeply she still didn't understand. I told her I wouldn't stop. That I couldn't. That what she had helped orchestrate was more than betrayal, it was theft. Of money, yes, but also of dignity. Of years I spent believing I was the problem. That I was cold or too independent or not cooperative enough. I told her I was going to court and that I wouldn't be settling quietly. She stood up without another word, walked to the door, and paused. Before she left, she turned slightly and said, "I did what I thought was best." And I replied, "So will I." That same week, Layla sent me an email. It was long, honest, raw in a way she'd never been before. She said she had finally confronted Devin. That she knew now how much had been taken in her name. That she had seen the forwarded emails and hadn't fully understood what she was agreeing to back then. She told me she wasn't asking for forgiveness.
Just for a chance to repair.
For her child, not for herself. I didn't reply immediately. I needed time. But I believed her. Because in her words, I saw something I hadn't expected. Regret that wasn't about damage control. It was about truth. About finally choosing it, no matter how ugly. When the court date arrived, the press had already gotten wind of it. Not just because of Devin's past interviews or our family name, but because the financials tied to Valerix had touched multiple public institutions. The charity run by my mother. A real estate group that had received donations traced back to the same trust. Even a local scholarship fund. I wore a navy suit. Flat shoes.
No jewelry.
I didn't come to shine. I came to be seen clearly. The court was quiet. The judge was firm. My lawyer presented the case with surgical precision. Not emotional outbursts. Just evidence. One file after another, each page louder than any scream. When the verdict came, I didn't hear cheering or gasps. Just silence.
Sharp.
Final. The trust was dissolved. All funds returned to a holding account under independent oversight. Devin was barred from executive leadership for 5 years. My mother was removed from her nonprofit board. And I was awarded damages. Financial and reputational. But that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the closing statement from the judge. She said, "This wasn't about money. This was about someone who refused to stay erased." And I smiled. Weeks later, Layla gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Claire. She sent me a photo.
No caption.
Just the image of a sleeping child wrapped in a soft blue blanket. The same color as the dress I wore to that baby shower. I framed the photo. Not because I'd forgotten everything, but because I was choosing what to remember and what to rebuild. Because sometimes the biggest twist isn't what's taken from you. It's what you take back and who you become after the silence ends. I didn't attend the baby's christening. Layla had invited me, and I appreciated the gesture. But I wasn't ready to be in a room full of people who had once applauded my disappearance. I sent a gift instead, a letter pressed between the pages of a hardcover journal. It was addressed to Claire, for the day she would be old enough to read it. I didn't write about the lawsuits or the betrayals or the boardrooms. I wrote about strength, about voice, about not mistaking silence for peace. And at the bottom I wrote, "If they ever make you choose between being loved and being honest, pick honesty. Love that can't handle truth isn't love at all." The following week, a document showed up in my office mailbox.
No envelope.
Just a single printout with a highlighted line in the middle. It was an old audit from 6 years ago, dated back when I still trusted Devin and my mother. There, in a tiny footnote, was something I had never seen before. A property title. One I hadn't known existed. A holding under a shell corporation tied to my mother's nonprofit. The address rang no bells, but the name on the file did. Eleanor Grace Holdings, signed under Jennifer M. Wells. My birth name. That name hadn't been used in years, not since I legally changed it after leaving the family business. The only people who had access to documents in that name were my immediate family and one financial advisor I'd worked with in the beginning. I remembered signing something vague, some estate planning paperwork my mother had insisted was for tax purposes when I was just out of college. I'd barely read it. I hadn't known I was signing ownership of a property. I hadn't known they would use it. I called my lawyer again, this time with urgency. She pulled property records within the hour. The house had been flipped 3 times, used in investment cycles tied to my family's trust. Each sale listed me as a silent co-owner, each profit routed around me through a tangle of forged documents and internal memos. It was worse than I thought. I didn't just reclaim a company. I had unknowingly been funding the illusion of my absence. The realization struck like a wave, cold, sudden, disorienting. While I was rebuilding from the outside, they were still profiting from the parts of me they'd hidden. My lawyer said it was actionable, majorly. Real estate fraud, identity misuse, intentional concealment. She said we could file immediately, reopen everything. But I told her to wait, because before I burned the last bridge, I needed to know who handed them the matches. That night, I sent a message to someone I hadn't spoken to in over 7 years. Ben. He had been my first financial advisor. The one I trusted when I was just getting started, when my name still had weight in the family and my ideas still sounded like hope instead of rebellion. We met the next day, in a cafe far from the city, quiet enough for old truths to breathe. He looked nervous.
Worn.
Like someone who hadn't slept properly in months. When I asked about the Eleanor property, he went still. Then he told me everything. My mother had approached him, not long after I'd left the company, and told him to help her tie up loose ends. She had said I was mentally fragile, that I had given her power of attorney in a prior document, which she used to sign follow-up forms. She told him I was okay with her managing things behind the scenes, that I didn't want to be involved. She had forged my initials on 2 contracts. Ben said he'd been uncomfortable, but not enough to question her. Not enough to stop it. He had assumed it was a family decision. He hadn't known how deep it went. When he finished, he said he was sorry. He handed me a flash drive with the original documents, a notarized affidavit of what he'd just said, and told me I could do whatever I wanted with it. That he wouldn't fight it. I thanked him. Then I walked back to my office with my hands trembling, not from fear, but from resolve. It was one thing to take a wedding from someone. It was another to erase them from their own financial history. This wasn't petty anymore. It was criminal. That night, I filed the papers. It triggered an automatic audit of every Monroe-related entity, business, nonprofit, and trust alike. I didn't announce it. I didn't post online. I just let the system do what it was built to do, follow the money. And the money led to places even I didn't expect. The audit uncovered 2 charities listed under my name that had never existed. Their donations had been redirected into political action groups, some tied to people Devin had done business with during Balrix's peak. One of them had my forged signature on a tax filing. The fraud wasn't just internal. It was federal. Investigators launched a formal inquiry. My mother's name was flagged. My father, quiet for most of this, was pulled into it. Devin was subpoenaed again. Even Layla was questioned, not as a suspect, but as a witness. When I received the official notice of the investigation's expansion, I didn't feel victory. I felt grief. Grief for what could have been if they had just let me go honestly. If they had given me a clean exit instead of digging a grave under my name. I spent that weekend alone, walking the edges of the lake where I used to ride my bike as a teenager. I stopped near the old swing set, now rusted and overgrown. I remembered a time when family didn't feel like a negotiation. And I decided, right then, I wouldn't wait for their apology. Because people who do this much damage don't apologize. They justify. And I was done justifying my silence. When I returned to my apartment, a letter was waiting. Not an email. A real letter. Handwritten. From Layla. She had seen the headlines. She had been called in for questioning. She said she had gone back and reviewed everything, her bank accounts, old emails, even phone backups. She found an old voice message from our mother, dated around the time I left. It said, "Don't worry about Jenny. She doesn't understand how things work. She never did. Let me take care of it." Layla said she hadn't thought much of it back then, but now she did. She ended the letter with a line I didn't expect. "If there's anything left that I can do to make this right, tell me. Not because I deserve it, but because I don't want to be like her." I sat with that sentence for a long time. Because sometimes growth doesn't come as a grand gesture. It comes quietly. In the form of someone choosing truth over tradition. And I realized, maybe the story wasn't just about loss or betrayal. Maybe it was about interruption. The kind that changes everything. And I wasn't done yet. 3 months after the investigation began, I received a call from the Federal Compliance Office. The case had expanded beyond anything I'd imagined. Turns out, what started as a silent betrayal within a family had quietly fed into a much larger web of financial misconduct. My mother's nonprofit was under full suspension, her accounts frozen pending review. Devin was facing personal liability after new evidence surfaced of forged authorizations tied to government grants. The press wasn't just circling. It had landed. Articles ran daily. Stories titled "The Fall of a Golden Family" and "When Legacy is a Lie." And in the middle of all that noise, for the first time in years, my name was being spoken with something I never expected again: respect. I kept my head down, but not out of fear. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was rebuilding, this time on ground that couldn't be pulled from beneath me. I took meetings with advocacy groups. I joined panels for financial ethics and women's legal protections. My inbox flooded with messages from people who'd stayed silent too long, who'd been dismissed, erased, replaced. I wasn't just telling a story anymore. I had become part of something bigger. Then one afternoon, as rain tapped softly against my office windows, a package arrived. It was small, square, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. "You were right.
I didn't see it then.
But I do now. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Dad." I hadn't heard from him in over a year. I plugged in the drive. It was a folder titled "Before It Broke." Inside were recordings, emails, copies of internal memos from over a decade ago. Evidence that my father had known more than he let on, and had tried, at least once, to push back. One email thread showed him arguing with Julia about the trust structure. Another revealed that he had refused to sign off on certain property deals unless my name stayed included. But eventually he gave in. The final file was a voicemail. "Jenny, I never had the courage to fight her. And you shouldn't have had to fight alone. I know it's late. But maybe this helps. Maybe this gives you one last missing piece." I sat there, holding the note, realizing this was the first real acknowledgement I'd received from him in my adult life. And even though it didn't excuse what he'd allowed, it mattered. Not for revenge, but for resolution. Because closure doesn't always arrive clean. Sometimes it shows up in pieces, long after the storm, when the wreckage has stopped moving. And you get to decide what to rebuild with. In the months that followed, the dust began to settle. Layla and I spoke more regularly now.
Carefully.
Honestly. She sent photos of Claire, her eyes round and alert, full of curiosity. I hadn't held her yet.
But I plan to. Someday.
Layla had moved out of their old house. She was working again, slowly rebuilding her life, without the shadow of someone else's approval. She thanked me more than once, not just for what I'd exposed, but for showing her how dangerous loyalty can become when it's blind. And my mother? She went silent. Her lawyer released a statement about deep regret and unintended consequences. But she never reached out again. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to say. Maybe she still believed she was right. That's the thing about people who confuse control with love. They don't break. They calcify. I didn't wait for her to change. I changed everything else instead. The company I'd quietly acquired was now growing again, but with a new mission. Not just profits, purpose. We restructured our internship program to prioritize women returning to work after family estrangement. We funded a legal aid wing for daughters pushed out of inheritances by informal family agreements. And on our website, under the founder's note, I added one line. Sometimes the ones you erase come back with the pen. The board approved a new scholarship fund in my name. Asked them to name it the Claire Wells Grant instead. Because legacies don't have to repeat. They can begin again. A year after the baby shower that started it all, I returned to the same house. Not for confrontation. Not even for closure. But for something quieter. I parked outside for a long moment before stepping out. The backyard looked the same. Soft lights strung across the fence, trimmed hedges, a fresh set of garden chairs. Layla was waiting near the back door. She held Claire in her arms, her face softer now, less polished. More real. We didn't hug right away. We just stood there, two sisters who had survived each other's silence. Then she handed me the baby. Claire blinked up at me, unfazed by the storm that came before her. I held her gently, my hands steady. She reached up, fingers wrapping around one of mine. Layla watched us for a moment, then said, "She already loves you. I can tell." I smiled. Not for forgiveness. But for the future. Because I had learned something along the way, something no courtroom, no document, no apology could have taught me. Real justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet room, a soft breath, a hand you were told you'd never be strong enough to hold. Sometimes justice is not erasing them. It's making sure they never erase you again. And sometimes that's all the closure you ever need.